So I've got Wyatt O'Rourke on the podcast today. And before I jump into my conversation with Wyatt, I also wanted to say I just finished my first cycle in Bitcoin, my first 4-year cycle. I essentially had my anniversary in March of this year, and nobody sent me anything, by the way. I thought maybe I would get, I don't know, a trophy or an attaboy or something like that. Haven't got that yet, so maybe I'm giving that to myself right now. But one of the things that I did at my investment firm is I did a little bit of a research report on just basically what the last 4 years of Bitcoin have looked like. So I thought I would share a little bit of the report card with you, being as how this has been a theme that I've talked about over the last 4+ years of this podcast at this point. So I did a kind of a 4-year performance analysis. And this is a period between March 31st of 2021, which is the first day that I recommended Bitcoin to clients at my firm, through March 31st of this year. So it's a very specific 4-year period. And I looked at the CAGRs, which, for you stat nerds listening, I know that there's issues with like using this sort of methodology as opposed to arithmetic returns or something like that. But I'm keeping it simple here, and I'm trying to have a bit of a sober look at the returns on Bitcoin. Because let's face it, one of the things I've learned over the last several years, we talk about things like sound money, but at the end of the day, it's really number go up that gets people interested in Bitcoin, that really raises the eyebrows. And it doesn't really matter who you are. That's one of the lessons that I've learned in Bitcoin over the last several years. So let's take a look at number go up. There's different closing prices that you can find on March 31st. Around 58,000 is what we're talking about for the price in March of 2021. And over this period of time, Bitcoin's CAGR, Bitcoin's annualized return. So essentially you buy it on this date, and then you sell and you hold it and you do nothing else, and then you sell it for 4 years later, was 8.8% over that period of time. That's the CAGR. So that's the annualized return over that period of time. So let's compare that to some other different market proxies. So I think most people would probably agree the market proxy is the S&P 500. So the S&P total return over that same period of time was around 10%. So the Bitcoin CAGR has trailed the S&P. The NASDAQ, so the QQQ, another market proxy for a lot of folks, has been around 11. I'm kind of rounding here, so I'm not using precise numbers. If you want the precise report, let me know. I'll send it to you. Something like Developed International was 6. So international stocks have underperformed all these proxies, including Bitcoin, over the last 4 years. And if you want to know the winner is gold over the last 4 years, or at least the 4-year period that I looked at, was something around 14% for the CAGR. Now, how did it get there? So Bitcoin's maximum drawdown was 77% during that time. That was between 2021 and 2022. I remember that, as I imagine many of you do as well too. The S&P 500 had a 24% maximum drawdown. That was in 2022. The NASDAQ was 35%, and then gold had just a 21% drawdown during that period of time. So what happened is essentially Bitcoin had a larger drawdown and had a lower CAGR during that period of time. What are my takeaways here? Well, one of the things that jumps out to me is oftentimes Bitcoin is framed as like a asymmetric opportunity, meaning it's going to either take over the world or it's going to go to zero. It's kind of like the way that it's framed in kind of explain it to me like I'm 5 terminology, asymmetric. And what has happened, at least during this 4-year period, is neither of those things. It hasn't been an asymmetric return. In fact, it's just been sort of an okay return over that period of time. And so that's interesting. That's a little bit surprising. It's outperformed certain meme stocks of the era. So if you look at something like GameStop over that same period of time, I see that GameStop has lost you 15% a year during that same 4-year period. And so that's interesting. I think a lot of folks would have lumped Bitcoin into sort of meme stock category if you were to kind of poll the investment community in 2021. And so it's maybe underperformed kind of broad asset classes, at least during that very specific time, but it's done better than a lot of the meme stock craziness, things that were going on during 2021. So yeah, it's a bit of a sober look at the last 4-year period. What I think about this is the main thesis is still intact. So if you think about the thesis of digital gold or Bitcoin as savings technology, that's still intact. One of the things that Wyatt and I are going to talk about here is, some of this terminology has sort of seeped into the mainstream. You see kind of like these niche arguments for like Bitcoin maximalism taking place in forums and Twitter that have now sort of seeped into more of the mainstream rhetoric. I think that's very interesting. So the thesis hasn't changed. To me, it's the same as it was 4 years ago. And that's important to me. There's no thesis creep here where you have to change the thesis for Bitcoin every 4 years. It's still not the case. So that's where we're at. So maybe we'll revisit this in another 4 years, but that is my first cycle for Bitcoin. So now let me introduce you to Wyatt. Wyatt O'Rourke is joining me on the podcast today. Wyatt is one of the founders of The Space in Denver. He is the author of a new book called The Bitcoinization of Finance, and he is the owner of Basilic Financial, which is his investment firm. Wyatt is also a financial advisor, one of the few advisors in Bitcoin. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Wyatt O'Rourke. This is Gentleman Speculator. My name is Andy Flattery. I'm the owner of Flattery Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor. All opinions expressed by me and my guests are solely our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Flattery Wealth Management. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment, tax, or legal advice. Clients of Flattery Wealth Management may maintain positions in Bitcoin and the securities discussed in this podcast. Wyatt, good to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining. How are you?
I'm great, man. A long-time listener, first-time caller, so it's an honor to be on the Gentleman Speculator.
Yeah, this is like, the miracle of the internet. You and I have connected across the country. We have all these things in common. That's kind of one of the wonderful things about sort of living in these kind of network state sort of environments, if you will. We have a couple things to talk about. I want to talk about Bitcoin. I want to talk about your Citadel venture, the space, and then maybe talk about some Catholic stuff. It's been a while since I've done a Bitcoin episode, so I thought we should just jump into that. Let's just do a little bit of like where your head's at with regards to Bitcoin. How are you viewing like the state of the union right now? What's your thought on just kind of where we are and like what are you seeing in your orbit?
Totally. Well, I'm usually bullish. That doesn't change too often, but at this point in time, I'm like particularly bullish just because I think there's like some structural changes in the Bitcoin market or greater Bitcoin ecosystem underway. I tend to focus on kind of like the finance side of things. That's how I got drawn into Bitcoin from the first place. I'm just a finance bro. I'm not like an engineer, computer scientist. So I had to learn that stuff after, and definitely not my strong suit. But in terms of like the greater ecosystem, there's been talk about the strategic Bitcoin reserve for a while. That got enacted. I kind of come from the Whitney Webb school on like not worshiping politicians. So I don't want to get too in the weeds or like praise them, too much or idolize them by any means for doing stuff like that. But I do think it's a step in the right direction. As a patriot, an American citizen, I'm very happy like our country has a Bitcoin reserve, and I think that will just kind of waterfall into the private industry and just ultimately lead to more Bitcoin-friendly regulations and policy. I think one of those, or a couple of those being, SAB 121 got repealed with SAB 122, so it's easier for banks to custody Bitcoin. It used to be under the fair value accounting principles that if they held Bitcoin, they had to have an equal amount of assets to counterbalance that. So it was almost treated more like a liability. And so that really kind of penalized traditional financial institutions from holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, being able to offer Bitcoin financial services to their customers. So I anticipate that to be a pretty bullish move. And I really kind of categorize these things into like the broader financialization of Bitcoin. And I usually use that word as like a bad word. And I think most Bitcoiners kind of cringe when they hear that. But, to me, I think this is an extremely, bullish trend. There's been a lot of people talking about, Bitcoin will consume multiple industries, finance, definitely being one of them. I kind of think of finance, simply as really kind of like the business of money. And really what this boils down to is deeper capital markets is simply just a function of capitalism. We have two parties can each take a side of the trade. That trade can be multiplied into more trade. And then with market participants determining for themselves which side of the trade they want to be on. So something I'm pretty keyed into is financial instruments being built around Bitcoin. I give Build Asset Management a ton of credit. They built a private credit fund. This is like a TradFi private credit fund where they partnered with Unchained. Unchained originates loans to the business customers. So they use their Bitcoin as collateral. They get cash in return, and Build buys those loans. This is something happens in TradFi all the time. And then the investors in Build invest into that private credit fund, and they get paid out a yield. And this isn't like fake crypto altcoin yield. This is real TradFi yield. These are customers, paying an interest on that loan using their Bitcoin as collateral. So Build's, investors can then, pay, I think it's around 8 to 11% in this private credit fund based off, the interest rate that Unchained's customers are paying on that loan. So I really like to see stuff like that. I think, it makes our jobs as, fiduciaries much easier with the development of, private industry, specifically, in the finance realm, getting involved within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And ultimately, I think this leads to many things that help and make the Bitcoin capital markets more healthy. So we have just more diversification. So, that investor that was seeking some sort of fixed income investment, they might be historically forced to, chase yield in like something like a junk bond, or if they wanted safer yield, maybe like a US Treasury. But, as Bitcoiners, we know it's like sovereign debt is like a road to nowhere. It's like any yield you get paid back on is probably just printed money. So you didn't actually get anywhere with that investment, that money you locked up. And so I really like to see, diversification and different ways to get exposure to the Bitcoin as the underlying asset. I think it helps with risk management. We're kind of seeing the evolution of Bitcoin derivatives. And this is, a lot of these things can be a double-edged sword. I'll kind of get into like the Bitcoinization of finance. This is really kind of like the financialization of Bitcoin. I kind of talk about those as two different things, but derivative, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. This is a business contract where, like I said earlier, we have two market participants that want to take either side of the trade. And the hash rate derivatives, I'm seeing those get built out, quite a bit more. And that's an opportunity for Bitcoin miners to hedge their risk, just like traditional, commodities producers. And then you're able to get, larger institutional pools of capital, Bitcoin exposure using those types of instruments. The Bitcoin loan market is really expanding. So the ability for Bitcoin holders to, not sell their Bitcoin and, is instead use it as the pristine, collateral it is. And I'm really kind of watching the loan market, specifically for two main reasons. As lenders, analyze Bitcoin-backed loan applications. I think this contributes to better price discovery and risk assessment in the Bitcoin market. And this data helps investors better understand, the credit risks of these Bitcoin-backed, holdings. And then as, interest rates too are kind of a function of two things. So we kind of have competition. So the amount of companies offering Bitcoin collateralized loans. There's not a ton right now, so they're kind of able to charge a higher interest rate. So as more competitors move into that market, I can anticipate interest rates to lower, but those interest rates also serve as a market signal on the volatility of Bitcoin. And I think this also helps to contribute better price discovery. And so you kind of have like these more professional type finance teams moving into the realm. And that really just helps, deepen Bitcoin capital markets, which I think is, a fantastically bullish thing for the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, the Build guys did an event down here in Missouri last year, and I had a chance to go down and meet those guys and do a panel on Bitcoin and in Missouri, which is great. Yeah, I agree. Are you interested in this from just an observer, or are you like involved in these products? Are you recommending these? Do you own these things? How are you like? What is your interest?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to get, clients involved with these different types of instruments as much as I can. It is a developing, industry. So like Build's private credit fund, I think it's, phenomenally thought through product, but unfortunately you have to be an accredited investor, to invest in that fund. So that kind of limits the pool of people that can invest in it. However, Strive Asset Management is in the process of launching a Bitcoin bond ETF. And so that's just going to be, a standard ETF, and the holdings are going to be, made up of companies, public companies like MicroStrategy that have some sort of Bitcoin strategy within their corporate finance teams. And so they're generally issuing debt to buy, Bitcoin for their treasury and their balance sheet. And so just by that product being publicly available on the open markets as an ETF, like that just gives me an additional option, as a fiduciary to talk to clients about, and it's like, if they're not comfortable holding, Bitcoin directly, or maybe they have some sort of mandates, maybe it's some like qualified account, where we do have restrictions on being able to hold the bare asset. That's just another option, we have in our tool belt to get Bitcoin exposure. So I am monitoring it as, just somebody, interested in the overall ecosystem, but I think, it directly affects, my work and what I'm doing with clients as more and more of these products, become available. Kind of as well, I'm sure you get these questions a lot, specifically like my financial planning clients, serve Bitcoiners, specifically with that, if they want to buy a house, there's like the People's Reserve is coming out with like a Bitcoin backed, mortgage. And so you can use your Bitcoin as collateral to get, kind of a traditional mortgage, depending on how much Bitcoin you put up, that can help lower your interest rate. There's another company called Orange Bridge, which has a product that allows you to access your home equity and buy Bitcoin with that. So, these are all things, I do believe it's my duty, kind of keep my ear to the ground and see how the market's developing. And to work with clients as to suit their individual needs and knowing, there are options, available to them. And it's just really kind of getting creative. And I think that's really exciting. And I, give a ton of props to the entrepreneurs, like building these products. And that's what I kind of mean, with deepening capital markets. Like, okay, as a financial advisor, now I have more options to, bring to my clients. And I think that's just like the best of both worlds kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think you did a piece on the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network blog on these options for bond investors in Bitcoin. Yeah, from my vantage point, like I've seen just acceptance on the folks that I work with. So like some of these things are for like institutions or Bitcoin whales. Like the mortgage product would be for someone who doesn't have much of an income, but they are sitting on a big stack of unrealized gains. And so that's where you want to get a mortgage from. If you have a high income, that's probably not appropriate for you. If you aren't sitting on a stack of a lot of unrealized gains, it's probably not appropriate for you. But if that is your situation, then it's really good that these products exist. That doesn't tend to be my client base. Typically my client base has, fairly high income and they want to get involved in Bitcoin. And that's who I tend to work with. And I've seen acceptance. I lost Wyatt 2 clients in early 2023. I think I've only lost like 3 clients in the entire history of my firm. I serve 56 families. So it's a small thing. But it was because of the Bitcoin bear market at that time. And, flattery got us in at the wrong time, of course. That was the sentiment at the moment. So thank God things have come back. But so what I'm seeing is acceptance amongst clients. I'm also seeing where we're at is people interested in like, kind of the MSTR verse. So like the call options, the leverage ETFs. I just learned recently that there's like these yield products now that people buy where you can like get yield off of your MSTR or your Bitcoin ETF. So these are all kind of new things. And some of this, me kind of being the born financial planner, like I kind of roll my eyes at a lot of this stuff, but it does also speak to what you're talking about with like the financialization of Bitcoin. And also some people have made the comment that like, this is the new altcoins, it's like whatever derivative of MSTR you want to come up with next, like that's the new proverbial shitcoin, if you will. And I think that kind of makes sense. I hear less ETH talk these days from folks. And then from like peers, I do think there's like this implicit acceptance of Bitcoin maximalism. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's almost like there's like revisionist history where now like folks like in financial services will kind of be like, well, yeah, obviously like Bitcoin's the legitimate one. And like the thought is like, well, why weren't you saying this 4 years ago? It's like, well, at least it's like Bitcoin and not like a meme coin or something like that. And there's a little bit of like revisionist history. I feel like some of the Bitcoin maximalism stuff has kind of seeped into the culture. Yeah, my understanding is like the strategic Bitcoin reserve is going to be Bitcoin only, which is kind of Bitcoin maximalism seeping into it, even though it didn't necessarily come from Bitcoin maximalists, but you're seeing some of the rhetoric kind of expand into these various areas. I would just say like my temperament has been good for this past cycle. Like it hasn't been a straight line up, and even the last 4 years has not been particularly like mind blowing. But that's kind of good for my temperament. Like for me, like the highs are never too high. The lows are never too low. Like I'm kind of like an in the middle sort of guy in a lot of ways. And so I don't know, I'm pretty comfortable with where Bitcoin is at. I've never been too involved in like being super autistic about the cycles or the stock to flows or the trading strategies. I've been kind of just like a financial planner, like take a position and then hold it sort of guy. And so, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with where it's at. Of course, we're always waiting for a number to go up.
Yeah, totally. I share a lot of that same sentiment. I don't hold myself out to be, an active trader. It's like buy, hold, have conviction in your investment. That's why I do focus on, sound custody solutions, making sure, there's responsible holding of clients' Bitcoins, 2 or 3 multi-sig, cold storage. I try to educate people a lot on, the scams are just getting like so impressive actually. And, you really kind of I feel like I have to be on the cutting edge of, identifying, what's the newest way, people are trying to steal other people's Bitcoin. I just like think of my grandma. I was like, oh my goodness, like if like this is challenging for me to identify, it's like older folks are just going to be very challenged, and that's unfortunate. But we really focus on reducing our risk surface area and making sure the vectors of attack are minimized. Even though nothing's absolutely zero, but I do want to double click on there. Andy, you said about like these derivative products becoming like the new shit coins. That's where I kind of bring in like the Bitcoinization of finance, and I'm publishing a book with Brains that should hopefully be out into April, early May, and it's titled The Bitcoinization of Finance. And so while I am very bullish on the financialization of Bitcoin, while, taking tried and true TradFi strategies, products, whatever, and applying it to Bitcoin, I think that's just going to help the Bitcoin ecosystem grow. The Bitcoinization of finance, like we need to be very careful, and we do need to bring the maximalist, I'm an identified maximalist ethos to finance. And what I really kind of boil that down to is like the Bitcoin's, I think, super feature is the ability to natively allow users to custody the assets themselves. And, people have been sounding an alarm on like gold markets being manipulated for decades now. And that's really because you have like these unscarce paper products on top of like a scarce asset like gold. And you can kind of lever up the paper products, but then the paper products settle in cash. Like they don't actually settle in the asset like they're trading against. And that's where you get kind of all the manipulation, talk and funkiness in those markets. And gold is hard to custody. It's a physical real world asset. It's heavy. You need to have a bunch of security. Like there's all these things that go into making it difficult to settle gold in kind. That's just not the case with Bitcoin. It's an internet native digital open source protocol. Like the asset and the network are combined. The asset secures or the asset empowers the network, and the network secures the asset. Like that is why people refer to it as a pioneer species. And so, kind of my punchline of the book is that Bitcoin is different because you can actually custody it. Like there's no reason why we should be settling derivatives in cash when you can just settle the asset. And it's really when you combine like an unscarce thing like paper and a scarce thing like gold and Bitcoin where the manipulation happens. So that is to your point of bringing the Bitcoin ethos like to the finance industry. I think it's going to be of utmost paramount. And I do think Bitcoiners actually, whether it's just because they recognize how special Bitcoin is, but they do a really good job of actually kind of, policing other Bitcoiners in like a good way. It's like, hey, we kind of operate with the standard here. I always kind of, recommend clients, if you're looking to do business with a Bitcoin company, it's like, I use River as an example. It's like, do they post proof of reserves? Do they cold storage? And there's like a lot of easy things that, you can really check the box off of to prove to the greater ecosystem. It's like, yes, I'm an ethical actor. Like I'm doing things like the Bitcoin way. And we really shouldn't stand for anything, less than that. And so I'm really big into this idea of like, I don't want regulation. I don't want like unnecessary laws. I want us societally enforced like standards and taboos, right? So it's like, this is how we do things. This is like the right way of doing business. If you don't do it this way, like we're going to call you out and we just won't do business with you. And so it's a combination of Bitcoinization of finance is like a combination of making sure the asset actually settles and trades in kind, but then also, applying those maximalist ethos to the finance industry. And you really kind of mitigate, a lot of like the fun and games and manipulation that the finance industry is like known for.
So on that note, tell me about the space. What's going on at the space? What was the,
I think
what are you guys doing?
Yeah. I think the space is probably like one of the coolest projects I'll work on in my career. It's a Bitcoin Citadel, very similar to Bitcoin Park or Bitcoin Commons, or a member owned and operated community hub. And so those guys have been great. They've given us a ton of advice and how to get something like this off the ground. But it was a little bit more top down in those situations. Like you usually had like a company or like wealthy individuals that wanted to get this off the ground. We bootstrapped this from the community level. So it's more, ground up. Yeah. And it's been, extremely rewarding. We really kind of started tossing this idea around in like August of 2023, crowdsource it from the communities, like who's interested and helping build this. And so in April of 2024, we kind of had our forming night. We started collecting dues, and you can kind of think of it as like social club meets co-working meets event space meets like trade organization. So at first we were just doing, like camping trips, cookouts, that sort of thing to, really kind of build the community and justify, the dues to build our treasury. And then, we worked with some corporate sponsors as well, who were, paramount in helping us get off the ground. And, with that, the community support, we were able to, rent out a beautiful building here, and we haven't looked back. It's been extremely rewarding, kind of planting our orange flag in the ground. You mentioned network states. I'm quite a network state enthusiast myself. Big fan of Oblige and, his whole thesis. And I think this is like the pinnacle of what a network state is. And so, unfortunately, in the younger generation, like there really is kind of like this lost sense of community. Everything's moved so aggressively online. I think a lot of younger people don't have that traditional sense of like asking, your neighbor for help or chipping in where you fit in. And the space really kind of, solves that. And it's really been, beautiful to see. We've really tried to emphasize, if you have talents, to bring, like, do it at the space. Whether we have a large mining contingency, we have some programmers. Hunter Beast is one of our members. He's been kind of making the podcast rounds. Like, he introduced BIP 360, try to make Bitcoin quantum resistant. He's done presentations at the space. Like, he's worked on code and the Bitcoin proposal at the space. And so it's really just about attracting and educating people on like the Bitcoin ecosystem, and that's really our mission.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd say the Bheag thing, because one of the insights that I think he has is like this idea that there already are these communities that exist online, and the next step is going to be like taking so it used to be like you would take a real community and try to put it on the internet. Now it's you take a community that exists on the internet and you put it in the real world. And I'm guessing
that's exactly
you probably
right.
know a lot of these members from Twitter. I've talked to, I think Zach is involved, Zach from Casa. He's been on this podcast, and I've never met him in person, and I would love to I've never met you in person. But what you're doing is you're taking these internet community, like Bitcoin is internet native, and you're creating a physical space for it. I think that's pretty profound in a lot of ways, even though in some ways it maybe looks like a little bit like a co-working space, but there's like a kind of unifying ethos and a unifying reason for being, if you will.
No, it's absolutely right. And I wrote a piece with Zach, actually, and so it's about like the rise of third spaces. Like, these used to be
okay.
Like the town center or like the town square or the park. You can kind of think of like the old timey, like get up and proclaim something. And
no, it's McDonald's.
I kind of tied
it. My grandpa used to go into McDonald's and have coffee and like McMuffin at McDonald's, but I get you.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm a Midwest boy, true and true. And I always love the really small towns where they're just doing that at the gas station.
Right.
That's a real third space. Yeah. But yeah, Balaji's whole point is, like cloud power to land power. And, I really kind of align with him on like the return of, federalism. And, it takes, strong, young, ambitious, individuals to, pursue projects like this. And I think we really can't discount like how important like the meet space is. Like, I love the internet. And like you said, like we've never met in person, like we've only interacted over the internet. And so it has like tremendous capabilities. Don't get me wrong. But what you just miss so much like in the internet, like it only gets you so far. And the space really itself has just been like kind of a great example of that. It's like when you get people in the same room, like the amount of like back and forth and brainstorming like you can do is like it's unmatched, right? And so it's like that's where I would really like to challenge and encourage Bitcoiners, where it's like you should try to pursue this in your community, because talking on Twitter or Reddit is great, and there's a ton of educational material on there. But if you're really trying to understand something complex or further elaborate on ideas, like you can't replace like that in-person experience. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do, just because we are a nonprofit and member run. We're trying to open source as much as possible on our website, denver.space. If you go to the resources tab, like we have things like our handbook or like our treasury policy, and we're just trying to put as much as we can out into the open and open source as much of that within the ethos of Bitcoin, so we can try to make the next Citadel like that much easier to start.
I saw that. That's very cool. That's very Bitcoin. You're signaling all the right things there. So, yeah, that's very, very cool. I looked up the location for somehow you guys got a prime location right in the middle of Denver. Looked like it's almost by the cathedral over there, like a couple blocks away, if I recall. That's a great spot there, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, we totally lucked out. It was kind of on the location. It was a bit of like, you create your own hard work, creates its own luck sort of situation, where the owner of the building has been a long time, Bitcoiner, great supporter of entrepreneurs. And he's originally from, Nashville. And so he had like recently been to Bitcoin Park. And then when he came back to Denver, he got connected with us, and he was, very happy to see we already kind of got like the community aspect of this going. He was looking to purchase a commercial real estate building anyway. So it was like a match made in heaven. But it was tough, man, because we were literally touring like warehouses with an inch of dirt on the ground. It's like, we just need like a physical space, where you can get everybody together. And, when you're a startup, and you have Bitcoin as like your main treasury, and it's not like the most attractive proposition for most landlords. And so we really got lucky on like finding the right guy, and it's been a beautiful partnership.
I want to ask a question for myself because I want to do some version of this too. Do you have like 8 partners or something in this venture?
So we have a board of 9 members.
The owners, or who owns the business?
Yeah, so it's we're forming a 501c3 and then 501c7. Right. Yeah, and so the members are really like the owners. And so that gets like a little different with some of the nuances of the C3. That the main education or mission is, education. C7 is like member run. And so there's no owners, individual owners of the organization. It's like the members themselves. And so that's what was really important to us.
And I've sat on boards before, is that there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And if there's not, one owner, then there's like, sometimes there's no owners. How has that gone for you? Like, have you been able to find, not only a consensus, but been able to make tough decisions, or maybe you guys are still working out like how the business is actually going to be managed?
Yeah, man, I'm not going to lie. It's very tough sometimes. Bitcoiners tend to be on the stubborn side of the spectrum.
I'm one of those people, so I know.
Right. So we do have, elections coming up in April here. So we're kind of making like some tweaks to our bylaws just to try to make the decision making a little bit more streamlined. But you kind of elect the board. People can apply to be officers. Board hires like the officers, and so really, if you have some sort of skill set you feel like you can bring, and the board deems you as qualified to do so, it's really going to be kind of up to the officers and the board members being good stewards, overseeing the organization and try to take in the members' wishes and considerations. And it's difficult. We've had some shouting matches back and forth on like what direction do we take this, and it's like we're moving too slow, we're moving too fast. But ultimately everybody's heart's in the same place, and it's a very altruistic mission, and we really just want to do this for the betterment of our local community and then the greater Bitcoin community at large. And hopefully we can serve as an example and a template for this to happen in Kansas City.
I love it, and I want to visit the next time I'm out in Denver. I wish it was there when I had lived out there. One of the things I've heard you riff on, to me, and I saw you had a slide on this in your Bitcoin and Catholicism presentation. And I think you also mentioned it on your episode with Guy Swan, is this Noblesse Oblige idea. What grabs you about this Noblesse Oblige idea? Kind of what are your thoughts here? Because you and I are kind of the same mind on this particular idea.
Yeah, well, I give massive props to you because you're the one that tipped me off on this. I was just going through
it's in the air. Yeah, it's in the air.
Yeah.
Like, there's others that are kind of catching on to this right now. I think it's part of the zeitgeist, but yeah, no, cool. Thanks for saying that.
Of course, man. And I don't know. There are a couple things that I think, kind of pulled on my heartstrings. Like one, it just I think very much aligns with, the kind of the Bitcoin, maximalist ethos, also a Catholic. And I was really interested in the overlaps there. Yeah. And then,
always,
my grandpa.
We always got to point out the Catholic stuff.
Exactly.
You cannot let that slide. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Not on my watch. Yeah. My grandparents always joked with me that I'm an old soul. I've always been a lover of history as well. So it's kind of like a handful of things that when I listened to your pod, it was just kind of clicked for me. I was like, whoa, and then of course kind of overlaps with our work as well. And so it was just like, man, I need to dive into this more. But yeah, Noblesse Oblige shows like nobility obligates, and so. For centuries, Catholic families have been, expected to use their wealth and influence for the greater good. We have a long, tradition of raising saints. And so you try to bring that into, our current life. It's like, I want the church to live on for 2,000 more years. I want to be a protector of the faith. And, we're strive to, seek excellence. And, I think it's very helpful to look back at, previous examples of how people have done this in the past. Sometimes I get caught up in my own head, or, things are moving so fast. I'm just like, wow, it's like we're on the forefront of this, we're on the forefront of that. And when I just take a time to like pause for a second, the church has been around for 2,000 years, actually. And it's like, I'm not the first one to have these thoughts. There's actually, doctors of the church have done tremendous, work and committed, their whole lives to, thinking, deeply about these things. And so I just try to, draw on their teachings and learnings and apply that to, our modern day life. And I think, when I'm, as myself, as a Bitcoiner, working with Bitcoiners, I believe Bitcoiners are going to be, the 1% of political and economic power. And so that's a tremendous responsibility. And so it's how do you handle that responsibility? How do you put yourself in the right frame of mind? I think you really kind of like the Noblesse Oblige, like got it right, so these were generally like wealthy aristocrats that took it upon themselves to take care of their community, be good stewards of their wealth, lead by example. They applied like their moral worldview, which at that time, was the Catholic social teachings to like their day-to-day life. And that just seems to make so much sense to me in the context of Bitcoin.
Yeah, the first episode I ever did on this podcast was about a guy named William Volker, who was a Kansas City version of a local elite 100 plus years ago. And Kansas City had every city, by the way, had these people, especially during the Gilded Age. But actually Volker was, like a Lutheran or something like that. So it's not, it's in our sort of Catholic heritage. It's also part of kind of like the American WASP heritage. Now everyone talks about like how the WASPs have all fled. There's no more WASPs left. So it's like, it truly is the case that like these ideas, we're even past the point where like these are like old stodgy ideas, which was kind of the case like maybe 50 years ago when the WASPs were dying. Now it's like they're just totally forgotten. Like it's not even the case that they're like old and stodgy. It's like nobody even knows what we're talking about. Noblesse Oblige. That sounds like very kind of obscure and esoteric flattery. But it's, you also just say it's Spider-Man, like with great power comes great responsibility. Like I'm from very middle class kind of humble background in a lot of ways. In the Midwest, like everyone is sort of egalitarian, like everyone is sort of the same, even though we had local elites in the town I grew up in Iowa as well. But I think for me, the fact that I advise people that have these sorts of means, like from financial planning point of view, one of the things that's opened this inquiry up for me is like a real question of like, what should I do with this money? Which people ask me. Like Michael Kitces has this article on one of the points Kitces makes in this article. Kitces is like this financial planning guru, is like what people actually want out of their financial advisor is to help them understand what their goals actually are. Oftentimes, like we might sit down with someone and say, hey, what's your goals? But most people don't know. And like, they're actually looking to their advisor to like help them understand what their goals actually are. So it is a little bit of a burden to help somebody articulate like what it is that they actually want to do. And I just think like most people are so limited that they've never even considered that they have a duty or that their wealth comes with certain responsibilities in a certain way. So that's kind of where my inquiry comes from. How should I act? Is it just enough to just, you give to charity and then that's kind of like your get out of jail free card without doing anything else? And of course, it's in some ways it's a good and noble thing to give to charity, but a lot of times like that's been perverted in the modern age where like you give money to charity and it's actually a bad thing. Like you're actually doing more harm than good, which is totally perverse, but like that is the kind of the case. And so there's this series of talks, I think it was, or maybe it was one talk that this Pope Pius XII did in like the middle of the 20th century. And I have a whole book on this that I've pulled a bunch of stuff from. But Pius XII, he said that it is not in itself difficult to maintain religion and sound morals in the people when the upper class set a good example. So one of the things that's been lost, it's not just the case that there are certain duties of the nobility, or we don't have nobility in the United States, but you might say elites or natural elites or something like that. But also you really should expect these people to set a bit of an example. Because like we kind of copy the elites for better or for worse. We use them as role models. Like we peasants, we're looking to these people as like examples of how to live for better or for worse. And oftentimes it's a case where it's like, the elites, they're kind of like spouting garbage with their beliefs, but then like they're just living like normal lives, and you often hear that then the poor will kind of copy this model behavior. I want to get your thoughts, Wyatt. So I have some thoughts on a couple of elites in our day and age that come to mind. One of them is Elon, and then one of them is Trump. And I think these guys, like, they're good kind of good case studies as, undeniably they are elite. Like these are men that are kind of on top of their game and people look up to them. And they have both good attributes and some bad attributes that I think we could learn from. So I'm just going to lump them together in some ways. So I was making a bit of a list before this call. So
I love it.
If you look at Elon and Trump, both of them, they kind of represent a certain type of like male vitalism. Elon, kind of like the consummate entrepreneur. He's done things that, he's basically reinvigorated the space industry. He kind of reinvigorated electric vehicles, which was an industry that was left for dead. He probably will go to Mars. I think people can kind of now think that's probably going to happen, which is crazy to think about. And then Trump, probably made like the biggest political comeback in American history, I would imagine. Like, who thought that Trump was going to come and do what he did? That's just admirable. I don't care like what you think of Trump, like what he did in terms of a political comeback was pretty incredible. They both, I think, love the homeland. Elon's a little bit more enigmatic. I don't exactly know to what extent he loves the country, but I think Trump like does sincerely have like a love for the country, despite, kind of like his ego and all these things. Like, I do think he like loves the country and like he has the best intentions. And then I also think like they've both made sacrifices. So people have just tried to destroy Elon Musk, to destroy his businesses, and then they've literally tried to kill Donald Trump. And yet, like, both of these men, they're still on the public stage. They don't have to be, both of these guys could check out and retire and people would probably celebrate them for that, but they have not done that. And so I think there's a certain level of noblesse oblige to both these guys. But on the other hand, it's like both of them like exhibit low class behavior. So if you're talking about like noblesse oblige, like you're supposed to like exhibit kind of like upper class behavior that like the lower classes can emulate. Like, that's not the case. Like Trump, he still acts like he's kind of like, from the back streets of Brooklyn or something like that. He still acts like he's low class. People love that about him, by the way. Like, that's why the MAGA Midwest folks that I grew up with, like, they love this guy. And, I kind of like chuckle at it too, but that is like very much low class behavior that he exhibits in a lot of ways. Like he's tacky, like he's not a Bitcoiner in that result, like the kind of the chintz and the tackiness, like that's not kind of like Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ethos, if you will, even though everything's gold.
Yeah, right.
And then Elon's just like a weird dude. Like he's like this weird transient guy. I read a biography on him one time where like he didn't have a house. Maybe he has a house now, but at one point, like he just didn't have a house and he was like sleeping on people's couches and playing video games till 4 a.m. And then of course, like having kids with like random secretaries whenever he wants. Like, it's just like weird kind of low class behavior. If he wasn't the richest man in the world, you would say like he's like, this is like trailer park behavior. And so that's me kind of speaking out of two sides of my mouth about Elon and Trump. I think ultimately, like, I kind of like both of these guys, but I'm recognizing that they're like flawed elites, if you will, and they don't quite fit. Like, in some ways, they fit the model of noblesse oblige, but in other ways, they are like sorely lacking. But like, they're kind of like what we have. What did I get right, Wyatt?
Yeah, no, that's a phenomenal breakdown. I love how you're thinking about that. Two interesting examples there, actually, because I think and correct me if I'm wrong here, like you more or less said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like our elites are trash,
right?
And it's like very much like this Hollywood celebrity culture. And I think there's like a lot of like woke and demonic stuff that is just like appalling that goes on in those circles. And it's certainly like people we shouldn't be looking up to. And it kind of makes me, sad because, I certainly, the robber barons didn't have like some, they weren't perfect people. They had some like negative traits about them too. But just like that type of, elite, I think is, much more respectable than, modern day elite. And I think like the word elite has even gotten like a little, perverted as well. We should almost think of like a new word because I don't know if there's anything like bringing that back. But yeah, it's just like wealthy, people with responsibility, to their larger communities. And I've done almost a full 180 on Trump. I used to like be a raging liberal and have like TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And I identify much more as like a conservative than I do like a Republican. I do have to give him tremendous credit to, you said, like his political resilience. It's actually, I don't know if there's anything like it in history, just what he's gone through and everything like the blob has thrown at him that he's been able to withstand is really something else. But in terms of like when I was like less, could see less of what Trump has been able to, accomplish, I was always confused to like what you said, where it was like, kind of these very, humble Midwest folks. It's like, why do they love him so much? Like, he is a coastal elite. He really is like the epitome of that. And I think he is like kind of a grifter at his core. He's like Trump coin is like case in point. Even after everything he's been through, like he's still like can't resist making, a quick buck at the expense of others. And so the stuff like that, to your point, like really does kind of turn me off. But I do think like there are very few people, I should say, that are willing to sacrifice as like much as he has and to pursue like this office of, public, being a public servant. And so I do think that is very, commendable. Elon, he's an interesting one. I really, respect like his entrepreneurial chops, and I do like the way that I think he kind of went about his like business more than what Trump did. Like Trump, great marketer, kind of more of a TV star and marketer than anything, which is like props to you. He built, a fantastic amount of wealth doing that, not knocking on it. But, Elon more of just like actually, building companies, building products, building technology. And I just kind of have like more respect for that. But you're absolutely right too, that, his weak points where it's like his family life is like, while I do enjoy that he's like, we need more kids and, life is like beautiful and this is something that should be celebrated. He certainly has no respect for, a family structure, which I think, we both agree is like the basis of like Western civilization. And, it's like a man and woman, forming a family. That is like the best form of governance, known to mankind. And so he doesn't seem to have necessarily a lot of respect for that, which is unfortunate. But those are two interesting examples. And it's nice that we can point out like good and bad aspects of their eliteness.
What I was trying to say earlier, when, these kind of Noblesse Oblige ideas, it used to be the case where they were seen as old-fashioned or a facade. So like the facade was when people would have all the appearances on the outside, but then everybody would say like, well, but in reality, they're, horrible people behind closed doors. And, that was the critique of these people. Now it's like, there's no facade. Okay. So these elites that we kind of like them in some ways, like Trump and Elon, and these guys are totally different. I'm lumping them together just because of what's happened in the last 6 months of like these two guys on the same team. But now there's no facade. Everything they're doing is out in the open. They're not trying to pretend that they're somebody that they're not, at least from what I can tell. Like Trump is exactly who he says he is. And Elon, like wasn't some influencer like posting on Twitter about how she's having a baby with him. Like all this stuff is like out in the open. I don't remember the gal's name, but it doesn't matter. So now it's like, oh, these guys are so authentic and they're not trying to pretend that there's something not. Well, I just want people to like actually exhibit real virtue. And like I said, like in some ways there is actual real virtue here, but it's sort of twisted and mangled and it's not what you and I are looking for. We're looking to make saints, right, Wyatt?
That's right. That's right. Well, and that's why I think it's so important to have. I don't think like either of those guys, and it's maybe like their biggest weakness or missing point is like they don't have like a strong like religious background. Something.
Yeah, what
like
are they grounded in? Like what
exactly to fall back on?
Going to Mars, which is maybe the reason why Elon, like what gets him going in the morning, but like what is he ground? Like what is his foundation? What is he grounded in?
Exactly. And it's like, that's why, I think like Christianity is like so powerful for many reasons. But, when we were living, kind of like the peak of the West and we had like these high trust Christian societies, it's like, it's your religion and your morals that keep you honest behind closed doors. It's so you kind of have like that is like the integral part, I think, of like the whole thing of what makes the Noblesse Oblige noble. And without that, you are very susceptible to many different types of temptations. And, it's very easy to, dip your toe in those. If you think, especially if, you're rich and powerful and feel like you can hide those to the greater public.
Yeah. You mentioned you got a book coming out. When's that coming out?
Should be end of April or early May.
No way. That's terrific, man.
Yeah.
Let me know when that's coming out. What else is next for you?
Yeah. So the Bitcoinization of finance book, Brains is publishing that. I'm super excited to work with them. Yeah. They gave me a tremendous opportunity, and I really just kind of hope to, help, bridge the gap between traditional finance and Bitcoin finance, and, take the best of like both systems, and hopefully they can learn from, each other. And, we can kind of like leave out like the bad stuff, which, it might be well-intentioned, not practical. I try to, list some practical things that we can do in order to make that happen. We'll see. But then, speaking at the Bitcoin conference this year, which I'm super excited about, and then really just trying to, help grow the greater Bitcoin, adoption, specifically, trying to do that, amongst, Catholics and the church. I think this is, very important for us to, embrace and take on. I'm a big fan of the folks over at, Thank God for Bitcoin, and they really kind of help inspire me for my presentation on the overlaps of Catholicism and Bitcoin. And, the Protestants have done like a great job of integrating this into their faith communities. And I'm trying to get the Catholics to follow suit. And then, to your point too, I spent, really, what you're talking about, like helping people identify goals, like that's something, I'm hyper focused on, at work, and working with, clients on adopting like a human first, financial planning approach. And this is a philosophy I've adopted, from other people like yourself that I've learned from in the space, and really just kind of breaking down and identifying what's truly, important to us. Like in this day and age, like there's so many things like pulling for our attention, and, maybe pulling us, offline of our moral, obligations. So just really trying to, identify funded contentment, with people. And that's, for money and meaning are in balance, and identifying those lifelong pursuits, so their life and wealth has meaning. And this is really kind of like the classic Bitcoiner low time preference versus high time preference. But it's like, are you living a life of day-to-day pleasure over pain, or do you have like contentment where your life would go as you hope, and it has a source of purpose and meaning?
Good stuff, man. Well, hey, it's good to chat with you. We'll have you back on again. Everyone should listen to the episode you did with Guy Swan. That was terrific. And you're a good follow on Twitter, Wyatt O'Rourke on Twitter. But yeah, maybe what's your handle? Where's the best place to send folks that are listening?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me on, Andy. This is an honor and pleasure. You can find me on Twitter at WR O'Rourke. You can find some of my writings at wyatto'rourke.com, or some of my work at basilic.io.
Okay. Good stuff, man. We'll see you around.
Absolutely. Take care.